Welcome back to Catalyst University. My name is Kevin Tokoph, and in this video and the next video, we're going to be discussing best practices for strengthening the elbow flexors. Now, there are three primary elbow flexors. There's the biceps brachii, there is the brachioradialis, and the brachialis muscle. In the next video, we're going to be covering more brachialis and brachioradialis, but in this video, we're going to restrict our discussion to the biceps brachii. And you might be saying to yourself, well, that's simple, we just do bicep curls, right? Well, it turns out that there's a lot more intricacies to strengthening the biceps brachii, and there's some evidence out there about how to best do so. And not only that, but we're going to cover a wide variety of exercise variations and maybe talk about which ones might be better than some of the others. So, before we get into the actual strengthening exercises and the rationale behind them, let's do a brief review of the anatomy of the biceps brachii. So, the term biceps brachii, let's break it down. Brachii refers to the fact that this muscle is situated on the brachium, which is a term for the upper or proximal arm. Biceps, bi meaning two, ceps meaning head, it is a two-headed muscle. And the heads are named long head and short head. Now the short head is more medial and the long head is more lateral. L for long, L for lateral. That's how I remember it. And if we look at the distal attachments of these muscles, distally they converge into a common tendon, and that tendon goes and inserts on the radial tuberosity. And so being that this muscle attaches on the radius, and in terms of the radial ulnar joint, the radius is the bone that moves. This muscle's action is dependent on forearm position, whether the forearms are supinated, in a neutral grip, or pronated position. That's going to affect how the biceps brachii functions. So definitely an insertion on the radial tuberosity. But what a lot of people don't realize is that there's a second attachment. So the biceps also has a slightly wider tendon-like structure called the bicipital aponeurosis. And the bicipital aponeurosis attaches on the ulna. Most people don't know that. So there's actually two attachments, one on the radial tuberosity and one on the ulna via the bicipital aponeurosis. Now proximally, as the muscle goes up, it sort of bifurcates into the long and the short head, and they become more recognizable and distinct as you go up the arm towards the shoulder joint. Now, each of these heads has a different origin at the shoulder. So the long head courses through the bicipital groove, and it's covered up by this ligament called the transverse humeral ligament, and it courses up atop the head of the humerus, and it attaches on the supraglenoid tubercle of the glenoid fossa. That's the superior part of the glenoid fossa. And also, it has attachments on the superior labrum. In contrast, the short head of the bicep courses more medially and goes up and attaches on the coracoid process of the scapula. So because both origins are on the scapula, the entirety of the biceps crosses both the elbow and the shoulder joints. So therefore, the entirety of the biceps is a two-headed muscle, and it will be affected not only by the forearm position or radial ulnar joint, but also by the shoulder position. That's going to come to play as we talk about some of these strengthening exercises and what they are useful for. Now, the first exercise that I'm going to show here is the standard bicep curl. You're like, Kevin, we all know that this exercise strengthens the biceps. You just curl the arms up, progressively overload, right? I don't think I need to convince anybody that this is a bicep strengthener. However, if we look and see what the evidence suggests, there is some important information that dictates how effective this exercise can be at targeting those biceps. For example, forearm position and the equipment that we're using and how we're using it. So there's three facets here that I want to look at. And so let's take a look at the evidence right now. The first study here is titled Biceps Brachii and Brachioradialis, the latter of which we will get to in part 2. Excitation in bicep curl exercise, different hand grips, different synergy. And if we look at this figure right here, we see two components, the ascending phase and the descending phase. We can think of it as concentric and eccentric. And each phase is divided into three parts. We have the supination or supinated grip, we have a pronated grip, and then we have a neutral grip where the thumbs are face up. And of course, the higher the bar is, the greater the activity of the biceps brachii. And what we see here is that the supinated grip is the clear choice for the best activation of the biceps brachii. What we see here is that a supinated grip is significantly superior to a neutral grip. It's also significantly superior to the pronated grip. Not only that, a neutral grip is also superior to a pronated grip. But if we're just looking at the best practice for strengthening biceps brachii, it's very clear here that the supinated grip is going to be best. A lot of you probably already knew that. But what that doesn't tell us is what equipment can we use with the supinated grip? Because I could do dumbbells, right, one arm at a time. I could do both at the same time with dumbbells as well. I could use a straight bar. I could also use one of those undulated bars called an easy bar. What's best? Well, to answer that question, we're going to go to the next study. This study is titled Differences in Electromyographic Activity of Biceps Brachii and Brachioradialis while performing 3 variants of the curl. Now, if you look at these figures, there's 3 of them. A, on the top there, is the whole range of motion. C is just the concentric phase, and E is just the eccentric phase. And within each one, we have BC on the horizontal axis. BC is barbell curl. That's a straight bar. Easy is the easy bar, undulated bar, and DC is the dumbbell curls, okay? And generally speaking, with the exception of the concentric phase in the middle, what we see is that the easy bar is statistically superior to the dumbbell curls, okay? So generally speaking, if we're looking to get the most out of our bicep curls, an easy bar is better than the dumbbell curls. And that is true of the whole range of motion. Now, if we just look at the eccentric phase, we see that the easy bar is also, again, superior to the dumbbell curls, but also a barbell curl, straight bar, is superior to dumbbell curls. So basically, if you want to get the most out of biceps, maybe put the dumbbells down and pick up a bar. Now, what we don't see here is any statistical difference between a barbell, that is a straight bar, and the easy bar. So what does it boil down to? Well, it really boils down to the comfort of your wrists and your elbows. A lot of people, if they do a straight bar, it forces a tiny bit more supination, and theoretically that's better, but according to the evidence, it's not. If you can handle the barbell and have that a little bit extra degree of supination and it's comfortable on the wrists and elbows, fine, do that. But if it's not as comfortable and you need to take a little bit of that supination off with that undulated bar, then do that. There's statistically no difference between the two, but both are superior to dumbbells. The other factor here is how the bicep curl is performed. So let me show you from the side here. One thing that you'll typically hear is you absolutely have to keep your arm by the side. If the arm comes forward a little bit like that, that's wrong. It's cheating because you're kicking in all this anterior deltoid, all that good stuff, okay? If I keep my arm by my side, I will certainly feel the bicep squeezing a little bit harder, right? And if I come up a little bit, I don't necessarily feel it quite as much. But this is where we have to be really careful. I'm sure that many people have said this, but I heard one person say it, and it's a very wise statement. Don't confuse sensation with stimulus. It's kind of like a deadlift, right? If you, at the very top of a deadlift, squeeze your glutes, oh, you'll feel them. But that's not where the growth and that's not where the strength gains occur. The strength gains and the growth occur in the actual motion. I can squeeze my glutes at the top all day, and that's not going to do much. It's the motion that's actually important. Don't confuse sensation with stimulus. Remember, the biceps are also shoulder flexors, okay? They're not just elbow flexors, they're shoulder flexors. So when I bring the bar up a little higher, my shoulders performing shoulder flexion, and that's the biceps that are doing that. Yes, there's going to be a little anterior deltoid, but if I bring the arms a little bit forward, maybe aim the bar for my mouth, like try to kiss the bar, so to speak, that's actually going to be more effective than just keeping the arms by the side, okay? If I bring the bar up a little further, maybe to the mouth, arms come forward just a little bit more, that's actually going to be a little bit better. And no, it is not cheating. Yeah, anterior deltoids will kick in a little bit. But remember, biceps brachii, not just elbow flexor, they're also shoulder flexor, particularly when the forearms are supinated. So, enough on the standard curl. Let's go to strengthening the biceps in a position of shoulder extension. Now, when we are strengthening the biceps in a position of shoulder extension, we essentially have the arm behind the frontal plane of the body. And considering that the biceps are shoulder flexors, a position of shoulder extension is going to put those biceps on a pretty big stretch. So you can imagine where this is going. We're going to be feeding into that stretch-mediated hypertrophy. In fact, these exercises in a lengthened position of the biceps are really good at growing the biceps brachii because of that phenomenon. Now, with respect to biasing the long head of the biceps over the short head of the biceps, there are some theories out there about positioning the shoulder in external rotation while you're doing the bicep curls. Also putting the bicep in a lengthened position like this gets more of the long head of the biceps. Truth be told, there's not a lot of evidence out there in the literature to suggest either one of these things. However, circumstantial evidence or anecdotal evidence from the bodybuilding community, there is some evidence, I guess you could say, if you want to call it that, that performing these exercises in the lengthened position does target the long head of the biceps a little bit more. Just understand that you need to take that information with a grain of salt. There's really not a lot in the literature on it, but for the time being, we're going to say strengthening in the lengthened position is going to be biasing the long head a little bit more. In contrast, strengthening in a position of shoulder flexion. This means that now the arms are in front of the body, okay, in a position of shoulder flexion. This is like what we would see in a preacher curl. We'll see that in just a little bit. In these positions, the biceps are on active insufficiency, and so the amount of load that you're going to be able to use is going to be less than you would have in a standard bicep curl, let's say with an easy bar. Is there any advantage to doing these in the flexed position of the shoulder? Well, a similar argument. There's some theories out there that if you perform bicep curls kind of in an internally rotated position of the shoulder, that gets short head. There's some, again, anecdotal evidence from the bodybuilding community that if you do these like preacher curls, that's better at hitting the short head, right? Again, not a lot of evidence in the literature, but because it's so prevalent in the bodybuilding community and people still do it, we're going to go out on a limb and say that these flexed positions are better at hitting the short head. But again, we need to take that information with a grain of salt here. Now, personally, do I worry about long head versus short head that much? No, not at all. But I do like to perform some of my curls in a lengthened position. I like to perform some in a shortened position because as a physical therapist, I'm a big believer that we need to be strengthening muscle in multiple joint positions more from a joint health and a functional perspective, not necessarily from targeting more long head or short head of the biceps. But realistically, if we can start strengthening the biceps in a significantly lengthened position, which is a very weak position for a lot of people, and some people can't even access that position well, then our biceps and therefore our shoulders are going to be much healthier. Additionally, strengthening in a lengthened position, as we've started to mention, is absolutely superior for hypertrophy of the biceps brachii, and that leads us to the first exercise, which is shown right here. This is the incline curl, and I think the name of this is somewhat of a misnomer because it would suggest that the more you incline it, the better it is. Actually, think of it more as the more it's reclined, the better it is. I have my bench here pretty significantly reclined. Almost flat, not quite flat. Now, the only reason I don't have the bench totally flat and me laying in supine is because when I did that, the dumbbells actually hit the floor and limited the motion. So I do have to have a little bit of that incline there. But essentially, the more you recline the bench and lay back into it, the greater the degree of shoulder hyperextension and the more stretch that you put on the biceps brachii. Now, of course, you want to do what your body allows. You may have to start a lot more inclined, and then as you gain tolerance, work lower and lower. But again, in this position of shoulder hyperextension, those biceps are on a massive stretch. And what you don't want to do is, as you curl up, bring the shoulder forward. You want to keep that shoulder back and just curl like this, essentially, okay? You want to keep that hyperextension. And again, having it on that massive stretch, absolutely phenomenal for hypertrophy of the biceps. And also, you're going to get some pretty good strength gains out of this as well. Now, the benefit of doing incline curls is that your back is supported, so you have that added stability there. Another good exercise, but I don't think quite as good as incline curls, is shown right here. These are Bayesian curls. Now, Bayesian curls are done in standing. You could do them in sitting, but standing's a little better, especially with a staggered stance for a little balance there. And you can use cables or bands. Obviously, I'm doing this at home, so I don't have cables, so I'm using bands. And same idea as the incline curls, you are allowing the band or the cable to stretch that shoulder backwards into hyperextension, providing a stretch on the biceps and performing curls the same way. Again, not bringing the brachium forward. We want to keep the brachium in that position and just curl the elbow. Okay? Now, again, we're standing now. We don't have that back support, so we don't have as much stability. Therefore, we're not going to be able to load this one up quite as much as the incline curl. So if we're looking for hypertrophy, incline curl is going to be superior. Added stability means the brain is like, okay, we got stability. It's going to be safer to exert more force output through the muscle. Therefore, the muscle can work harder. So I would go with incline curls, but Bayesian curls are not a bad exercise. Now, the third exercise here is fairly unconventional, but I actually like it a lot. It's called a pelican curl, and it's either going to use rings or a TRX suspension system or something like that. I'm using TRX right here. And the idea now is you're using your body weight as the resistance. So you're still allowing the shoulders to stretch into maximal hyperextension, and now you're curling pretty much in the exact same way. This variation is particularly difficult because you're using your body weight. So generally speaking, make sure you can do a pretty significant amount of weight on incline curls first, and take this one easy. There's no reason to risk injury. Take it nice and easy. Don't go full range if you can at first. But again, this one is very good. And you might say, well, it's on rings or TRX. Isn't that going to mean that there's instability? Well, the thing is, when you get all the way down into the bottom position, that maximal stretch position right there, those TRX straps are taut as can be. Okay, so believe it or not, there's actually a lot more stability on this than you would think. And so for that reason, I actually like this one better than Bayesian curls. Still not as good as incline curls, but for me, incline curls number one, pelican curls actually number two on this one. And you can progress this one by putting your feet up on a step that's slightly higher and higher, so that way your body goes from this angle to gradually more closer to flat. Okay, so that's how you would progress the pelican curl. The disadvantage is that there's no objective weight that you're using, so you can't really track that as well. But very good for that stretch-mediated hypertrophy on the biceps brachii. So those are a few good exercises for strengthening in a lengthened position. Now let's switch to strengthening in a shortened position. And again, the biceps here are going to be on active insufficiency. Okay, the force output's going to be lower, as you know, and it's not going to feed into that stretch-mediated hypertrophy. However, I think that it's important to strengthen the biceps in multiple joint positions. So that being said, let's start with the preacher curl. Now, the preacher curl and the spider curl are actually fairly similar. In a preacher curl, the brachiums are not vertical. Okay, they're essentially going downward at about a 45-degree angle, give or take. You can do them slightly shallower, slightly deeper, but the point is they're not vertical. And so when you get down to the bottom of the movement, the biceps still have tension on them. Okay. The other thing you want to do is you've got this pad right here. You want to drive the arm into it, and that's using the lats. Lats create that stability especially as you're coming down, but also as you're pulling up. Okay, that's the whole purpose of having the pad there. Drive the arms down into it via the lats for stability. There's your preacher curl. Fairly straightforward. You can use an easy bar. You could use a small straight bar. You can use dumbbells. You can do unilateral, bilateral. It's very versatile. And the same things go for the spider curl, which you see right here. But there's one major difference. The spider curl, the brachium is vertical. And so the disadvantage of this one is that at the bottom, you lose most of the tension on the muscle. And if we're looking to maximize how effective the exercise is, we theoretically want to keep tension on the muscle for a longer period of time, as much as possible, that time under tension consideration. So we lose a lot of that on the spider curl. We don't lose that on the preacher curl. And so between these two, I would make an argument that the preacher curl is the better exercise. So if you had to pick one of these, preacher curl is the one. Now, a third exercise, going back to a ring setup or TRX suspension system, are these TRX bicep curls. Now, when you're doing TRX bicep curls, you might think, oh, I'm just curling like this, right? No. This is where we have to remember the biceps are shoulder flexors as well. Because if I just do this, then we're causing the lats to kick in a significant amount, and that's going to take it off of the biceps. It becomes more of a row. So what we want to do, as you see in the video here, is as we curl up, we want to flare the elbows up. And what that's going to do is it's going to take the lats more or less out of it and put the vast majority of the tension on the biceps brachii. Now, obviously, this one does not use objective weights either. So you can progressively overload it, and you do that by, your body starts up like this and gradually go deeper and deeper like that. So you're using a greater percentage of your body weight. But again, that's the main disadvantage, is there's not an objective way necessarily, with numbers, I should say, to progressively overload. But that being said, I do this one in the clinic all the time. I have patients do it. It's really effective, but again, not quite as effective as the preacher curl. Okay, so far, if we're doing a lengthened position, number 1 is the incline curl, number 2 is the pelican curl. If we're doing this in the shortened position, number 1 is a preacher curl, easy to progressively overload, and 2 would be the TRX curl. And that is our overview of strengthening of the biceps brachii. In the next video, we're going to be covering similar things for the brachioradialis and the brachialis, so make sure to join us then. But hopefully now you have a good understanding of what are some best practices to get the most out of your biceps from this video. Please make sure to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit that notification button for notifications for all videos in the future. Thank you so much.